The range master had seen it all. 23 years of training elite marksmen, and he'd never witnessed anything like what was about to unfold. The target sat 1,200 meters away, an impossible distance in these conditions. Wind gusts at 15 miles per hour, shifting every 30 seconds. The team captain shook his head and muttered the words that would haunt him for years. No one can make that shot from here, but somewhere in the tall grass, behind a scope he couldn't see, someone was already lining up the crosshairs. What happened next lasted exactly 2.7 seconds and changed everything the military thought they knew about precision shooting. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story of skill, doubt, and the shot that defied every rule in the book, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that legends are made in moments when everyone else says impossible, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. The morning mist hung low across the Quantico training grounds like a gray blanket that refused to lift. Advanced Marksmanship Course, Day 47. The kind of day that separated the hopefuls from the elite, the dreamers from the legends. 12 candidates remained from the original 36, each one carrying the weight of months of training, sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of proving they belonged among the military's finest shooters. Range Master Sergeant First Class Coleman stood at the observation tower, his weathered hands gripping binoculars that had seen more conflicts than most soldiers ever would. Below him, the candidates moved through their final qualification with mechanical precision. Each shot calculated, each breath controlled, each trigger pulled a culmination of everything they'd learned. But today wasn't about what they'd learned. Today was about discovering what they were truly capable of when pushed beyond every limit they thought existed. The wind picked up again, sending ripples across the tall grass that surrounded the range. Coleman frowned. These weren't ideal conditions for precision shooting. Hell, these weren't even acceptable conditions. Gusts were hitting 15 to 20 miles per hour, changing direction every few minutes like nature itself was testing these candidates. Most instructors would have called off the exercise. But Coleman wasn't most instructors. He'd earned his reputation by pushing shooters past their breaking point, finding that thin line between excellence and impossibility. Candidates, listen up. His voice crackled through the radio system that connected every position on the range. Target designation Charlie, 7. Distance, 1,200 meters. Wind conditions, variable, 15 to 20 miles per hour. You have one shot, one opportunity. Make it count. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a kind of silence that precedes something significant. 12 set of eyes stared downrange through high-powered scopes, studying the target that seemed to dance in the heat, shimmer, and wind. 12 minds calculated distance, wind speed, elevation, humidity. 12 hearts beat a little faster as the reality set in. This wasn't just another qualification shot. This was the shot that would determine who it would have took to join the ranks of the military's most elite marksmen. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, team leader for Bravo Squad, lowered his scope and shook his head. 22 years of military service, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. He'd made shots that other soldiers called impossible, earned commendations that most could only dream of. But this was different. "Sir," he said, keying his radio, requesting permission to speak freely. Coleman's voice came back through the static. "Permission granted, Captain. With respect, sir, these conditions are beyond acceptable parameters. Wind speed is too variable. Target distance is at the extreme edge of effective range. We're setting these candidates up to fail." The range fell quiet again. Other team leaders nodded in agreement. They'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't had the courage to voice it. Rodriguez was simply saying what everyone else was thinking. This wasn't a test of skill. It was a test of the impossible. Coleman's response was measured, calm, carrying the weight of decades of experience. "Captain Rodriguez, in the field, the enemy doesn't wait for ideal conditions. Mountains don't move because the wind is inconvenient. Sometimes impossible is all you got to work with." From position 7, a figure shifted slightly behind a standard-issue M24 rifle. No name tape visible from this distance, no rank insignia catching the light. Just another candidate in a line of 12, anonymous among the group. The only thing that set this position apart was the unusual stillness. While others adjusted their positions, checked their equipment, whispered calculations to spotters, position 7 remained motionless. Not the stillness of indecision, but the calm of someone who'd already seen what others were still searching for. Rodriguez keyed his radio one more time. "All due respect, sir, but no one's making the shot. Not today. Not in these conditions." The words hung in the air like a challenge, not directed at any particular candidate, not meant as anything more than a statement of tactical reality. But sometimes reality has a way of bending when it meets something extraordinary. Position 7 shifted just slightly, a barely perceptible adjustment of angle, the kind of movement so subtle that only someone looking for it would notice. Coleman raised his binoculars again, studying each position with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen thousands of shooters attempt thousands of shots. He paused at position 7. Something different about the posture, the way the rifle was held, the absolute stillness that preceded the shot. "Candidates," he announced over the radio, "you have authorization to fire when ready." The first shot came from position 3. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range, followed by the distant impact. Close, but not close enough. Position 5 fired next, then position 9. Each shot came with its own story of calculation, adjustment, hope. Each impact told a tale of near misses and the cruel mathematics of extreme range shooting. By the time 10 candidates had fired, the pattern was clear. Good shooters, excellent training, but the conditions were simply too much. Rodriguez had been right. Position 7 still hadn't fired. Coleman focused his binoculars on the motionless figure. "Position 7, you're cleared to fire." No response. No movement. Just the continued stillness that had marked this position from the beginning. For a moment, Coleman wondered if there was an equipment malfunction, a medical issue, something that would explain the delay. He was about to call for a safety check when position 7 finally moved. Not the hurried adjustment of someone behind schedule. Not the nervous fidgeting of someone under pressure. Just a slight shift of the head, a minor adjustment of the rifle's position. The kind of micro-movement that suggested not last-minute preparation, but the final element of a calculation that had been ongoing since the exercise began. The shot, when it came, was different from the others. Not louder, not more dramatic, but somehow more final. The kind of micro-movement that suggested not last-minute preparation, but the final element of a calculation that had been ongoing since the exercise began. The shot, when it came, was different from the others. Not louder, not more dramatic, but somehow more final. The kind of sound that carries weight beyond its acoustic properties. The crack of the rifle was immediately followed by something none of them expected. Complete silence. Not the usual chatter spotters confirming misses or near hits. Not the radio traffic of range safety checking impacts. Just silence. Coleman kept his binoculars trained on the target downrange. For 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, he said nothing. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath, each second adding weight to the moment. Finally, his voice came through the radio, quieter than usual, carrying a tone that 23 years of range instruction had never required before. "Direct hit, center mass, perfect score." The words didn't compute at first. Rodriguez blinked, raised his own binoculars, studied the target that had seemed impossible just moments before. The impact was unmistakable. Not a near miss that qualified as acceptable. Not a hit that barely counted. A perfect bullseye at 1,200 meters in conditions that had defeated 10 other expert marksmen. "Confirmation requested," Rodriguez said into his radio, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Confirmed," Coleman replied. "Position 7, direct hit, center target." Across the range, 11 other candidates turned their attention to position 7. The figure behind the rifle had barely moved since taking the shot. No celebration, no acknowledgement of the impossible feat just accomplished. Just the same stillness that had marked this position throughout the entire exercise. Coleman climbed down from the observation tower, his boots hitting the gravel with purpose. In 23 years of range instruction, he'd seen maybe a dozen shots that defied explanation. Shots that seemed to bend physics, that made him question what he thought he knew about marksmanship. But this was different. This wasn't just an exceptional shot under difficult conditions. This was a shot that redefined what those conditions meant. As he approached position 7, details became clearer. Standard issue equipment. No special modifications or custom adjustments. The kind of rifle that any of the other candidates could have been using. No exotic ammunition. No specialized optics. Just precision military hardware in the hands of someone who understood its capabilities better than its designers had ever imagined. The figure behind the rifle finally moved, lifting their head from the scope. Coleman stopped walking. Even at this distance, even with the tactical cap pulled low, there was something about the face that made him pause. Not familiar exactly, but somehow significant. The kind of face that belonged in briefings he wasn't cleared to attend, in files he wasn't authorized to read. Position 7, he called out, his voice carrying across the range without the need for radio amplification. Report to the observation tower for debrief. The figure stood slowly, deliberately, with the measured movements of someone who had never been in a hurry for anything. The rifle was secured with practiced efficiency, equipment gathered with the kind of care that spoke of years of repetition. And then, for the first time since the exercise began, Position 7 spoke. Copy that, Range Master. The voice was calm, clear, carrying easily across the distance. But it was what the voice revealed that made Coleman stop in his tracks. Not the tactical bearing he'd expected. Not the gruff acknowledgement of a career soldier. The voice was distinctly, unmistakably feminine. Rodriguez keyed his radio, his voice urgent. Range Master, Position 7 is... He paused, searching for the right words. Range Master, we need to verify candidate credentials. But Coleman was already moving, his 23 years of experience telling him that verification was the least of their concerns. As Position 7 approached the tower, each step revealed details that the distance had hidden. Average height, lean build, nothing physically imposing. No swagger, no attitude, no indication that anything extraordinary had just taken place. Just a quiet confidence that seemed to suggest a 1,200-meter shot had been exactly as routine as breathing. Ma'am, Coleman says Position 7 reached the base of the tower. I need to see your identification. The response came with a slight smile, the first human expression that had been visible all morning. I'm afraid that's classified, Range Master. Coleman had heard that phrase before, not often, and never from candidates in basic marksmanship courses. Classified was a kind of word that appeared in situations involving people who technically didn't exist, operations that officially never happened, and units whose existence was acknowledged with carefully worded non-denials. Ma'am, with respect, I need something. This range operates under standard military protocols. Everyone who fires a weapon here has to be properly documented, properly cleared. She reached into a pocket of her tactical vest and withdrew a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Not an ID card, not a military credential, just a piece of paper that looked like it had been printed on a standard office printer. Coleman unfolded it and read 3 lines of text. Authorization code, Blackbird 7 Alpha. Clearance level, compartmented. Contact, do not contact. At the bottom, a phone number with no area code and a signature that wasn't quite readable. Coleman had seen enough classified documents in his career to recognize authenticity, even when he couldn't understand the specifics. This was real, which meant the woman standing in front of him was something well beyond a marksmanship candidate. Ma'am, I'm going to need to call this in. You're welcome to try, Range Master, but I think you'll find that number routes to a voicemail system that will refer you back to standard channels. And standard channels will tell you that there's no record of anyone by my description being authorized to train on this range today. Coleman looked at the paper again, then at the woman who had just made a shot that will be talked about for years. Who are you? Someone who needed to see if a particular rifle performed to specifications under adverse conditions. Today it did. Thank you for the range time. She turned to walk away, but Coleman's voice stopped her. Ma'am, that shot, in those conditions, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. She paused, turned back with that same slight smile. Range Master, you've been training people to hit targets. I've been trained to hit targets that don't want to be hit, from positions that don't exist, under conditions that aren't supposed to be survivable. Today was just practice. Rodriguez approached, his radio crackling with chatter from the other candidates. Sir, the other shooters are asking questions. They want to know who made that shot, how it was possible, what kind of training produces that level of precision. Coleman looked at the woman, then at the paper in his hands, then back at the target downrange that still showed the evidence of something extraordinary. Tell them it was an equipment test. Tell them we were evaluating a new rifle system under adverse conditions. And the shooter? Coleman looked at the woman one more time. She was already walking toward the parking area, moving with the same measured pace that had characterized everything about her presence on the range. Tell them she was never here. But the story didn't end when she disappeared into the morning mist. If anything, it was just beginning, because what Coleman and Rodriguez didn't know was that the woman who had just redefined impossible had been watching them for weeks. Not the range, not the training program, but them specifically. And the shot she just made wasn't practice for some future mission. It was an audition. Her name, for those few who were cleared to know it, was Sarah Chun. But names were fluid things in her world, changing with assignments, locations, and the specific requirement of operations that didn't officially exist. To the Army, she was a consultant. To the CIA, she was an asset. To a very small group of people who coordinated activities that kept the world stable in ways the public would never understand, she was simply the ghost. Chin walked to a nondescript sedan parked 3 blocks from a range. No government plates. No military stickers, nothing that would draw attention or create records. She slid behind the wheel and pulled out an encrypted phone, the kind that automatically deleted conversations and routed calls through servers on 3 different continents. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Report. Test completed successfully. Target acquired at maximum effective range under adverse conditions. Equipment performed to specifications. And the observers? Chin glanced in her rear-view mirror toward the range where Coleman and Rodriguez were probably still trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Impressed but manageable. Range Master Coleman, his former Special Forces, served 2 tours in Somalia. He understands operational security. Captain Rodriguez is line infantry, good soldier, but he'll follow orders not to ask questions. Excellent. How soon can you be in position for Operation Nightfall? Chun started the engine, already calculating travel time, equipment requirements, and 1,000 variables that would determine whether her next target would be as accommodating as a paper bullseye at 1,200 meters. 72 hours. Understood. Package will be waiting at the usual location. Chun! Yes. The target in Nightfall won't be standing still. Chin smiled, the same slight expression she'd shown Coleman. They never do. Back at the range, the aftermath of the impossible shot was creating ripples that extended far beyond the immediate confusion of candidates. Coleman stood in his office, staring at the authorization paper that had more questions than answers. He'd made 3 phone calls. The first to base security, asking for any record of authorized personnel using the range for equipment testing. No record. The second to the Pentagon, using a contact who specialized in tracking unusual military activities. No information available. The third to a number he'd hoped never to use again, a contact from his own days and units that preferred anonymity. Jimmy, this is Coleman. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. The voice on the other end carried the weight of shared experiences in places that didn't appear on maps. What's got you spooked, Range Master? Had a shooter on my range today. Civilian clothes, military bearing. May a shot that defied physics. When I asked for ID, she gave me a paper with an authorization code I've never seen and told me her identity was classified. A long pause. She? That's right. Female, maybe 35, 40 years old. Asian features. Move like she'd been doing this her whole life. And Jimmy, the shot she made, I've never seen anything like it. Another pause, longer this time. Coleman, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to hang up, and we're never going to talk about this again. There are people in our world who don't exist on paper. People whose service records are buried so deep that admitting they exist would compromise operations you, and I don't have clearance to know about. If one of those people showed up on your range, made an impossible shot, and disappeared, then you witnessed something that officially never happened. Jimmy, it never happened, Coleman. And if you know what's good for you, you'll make sure it stays that way. The line went dead. Meanwhile, Rodriguez was dealing with his own crisis of understanding. 11 elite candidates, men and women who had trained for months to reach this level, had failed a test that a mysterious woman had passed with apparent ease. The questions were coming from all directions. Base Command wanted a report. The candidates wanted explanations. His own superiors were asking how a civilian had gained access to a restricted military training facility. But the questions that bothered Rodriguez most were the ones he was asking himself. In 22 years of military service, he developed an eye for reading people. The woman who had made that shot hadn't moved like someone attempting a difficult task. She'd moved like someone completing a routine procedure. The kind of calm confidence that came not from hoping to succeed, but from knowing that failure wasn't an option. He'd seen that kind of certainty before in the mountains of Afghanistan, watching Delta Force operators prepare for missions that would never appear in official reports. The same stillness, the same economy of movement, the same absolute focus that suggested capabilities well beyond conventional military training. Candidate Morris from Position 3 approached Rodriguez's office, knocking on the doorframe before entering. "Sir, the other candidates are talking. They want to know who that was, how she got authorized to shoot with us, what kind of training produces that level of skill." Rodriguez looked up from the paperwork. He wasn't really reading. "Morris, in your experience, when you see something that doesn't make sense, something that challenges everything you thought you knew about what's possible, what's usually the explanation?" Morris shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I'm not sure I follow." "The explanation, Candidate Morris, is usually that your understanding of what's possible was incomplete, that there are levels of training, levels of capability, levels of operational reality that exist beyond what most people are clear to know about. So that woman, as far as any official record is concerned, was never here. The shot you think you witnessed never happened. This conversation we're having right now is not taking place." Morris stared at Rodriguez for a long moment, recognition dawning in his eyes. He'd heard rumors, whispers of units that didn't appear on organizational charts, operators whose names were classified at levels above top secret. "Understood, sir." After Morris left, Rodriguez sat alone in his office, thinking about the implications of what he'd witnessed. If the woman had been real, and the evidence of her shot was undeniable, then there were capabilities within the military that exceeded everything he thought he knew about precision shooting. Which raised the question, what else didn't he know? That evening, at a bar 3 miles from the base, Coleman and Rodriguez met for drinks they both desperately needed. Neither had planned the meeting, but when Rodriguez walked in and saw Coleman sitting alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a whiskey that wasn't his first, the conversation became inevitable. "Hell of a day," Rodriguez said, sliding onto the adjacent stool. Coleman didn't look up from his drink. 23 years I've been running that range. 23 years of watching some of the best shooters in the world push the limits of what's humanly possible. And today, he took a sip of whiskey. Today I saw something that redefined those limits. Rodriguez ordered his own drink before responding. "Marcus Rodriguez. We've met, but never formally. Tom Coleman. And yeah, we need to talk." They sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the day's events in their own way. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. "The authorization paper she showed you, did it look legitimate?" "More than legitimate. It looked like the kind of document that gets people court-martialed for asking too many questions about it. And the phone number? Probably routes to a voicemail system that would deny this conversation ever took place." Rodriguez stared into his glass. "I've been in the military for over 2 decades. I thought I understood the structure, the hierarchy, the chain of command. But today I realize there are parts of this organization that operate completely outside anything I've been taught to recognize. Coleman nodded. Special Activities Division. That's what they used to call it. Groups that handle situations too sensitive for conventional military units. The kind of people who get called when regular special forces aren't specialized enough. You think that's what she was? I think, Coleman said carefully, that what we witnessed today was someone demonstrating capabilities that most people aren't supposed to know exist. And I think we're lucky that all she wanted was to test a rifle. Rodriguez raised his glass. To questions we're not supposed to ask about answers we're not supposed to know. Coleman clinked his glass against Rodriguez's. And to hoping we never see her again. Because if we do, it probably means something's gone very, very wrong with the world. But Chen's appearance at the range had been noted by more than just Coleman and Rodriguez. In a secure facility 40 miles from Quantico, analysts who specialize in monitoring unusual activities had flagged the incident within hours. Not because of any official report, there wasn't one, but because of the digital footprint that even the most careful operations couldn't completely eliminate. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, senior analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Monitoring Division, studied the data on her screens with the methodical attention to detail that had made her invaluable to operations she couldn't discuss with her family. Satellite imagery showing an anomalous vehicle arrival and departure, cell tower data indicating an encrypted communication from the vicinity of the range, and most telling, the complete absence of any official documentation for what had clearly been a significant event. Johnson, she called her junior analyst, pull up the Quantico range activity for today. Specialist Johnson's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. Standard advanced marksmanship qualification. 12 candidates. Normal test parameters. No incidents reported. Define normal test parameters. Target distance 1,200 meters. Wind conditions 15 to 20 miles per hour. Single shot qualification. Hawkins paused a review of the satellite data. 15 to 20 mile per hour winds at 1,200 meters? Yes, ma'am. That's actually outside normal qualification parameters. Most ranges would have postponed the exercise, but this one didn't. No, ma'am. Hawkins pulled up additional data streams, cross-referencing the range activity with personnel movements, vehicle tracking, and communications intercepts. The pattern that emerged was telling in its careful inconsistency. Everything about the day's activities was perfectly documented, except for the one element that mattered most. The results. Johnson, who was a range master for today's exercise. Sergeant First Class Thomas Coleman. 23 years service, exemplary record, former Special Forces. And the supervising officer? Captain Marcus Rodriguez. 22 years service, multiple combat deployments. Currently assigned to advanced training oversight. Hawkins made notes in a file that would never be accessed by anyone outside her immediate chain of command. Coleman and Rodriguez were both experienced professionals with security clearances that allowed them to participate in sensitive operations without asking inconvenient questions. The kind of people who understood that some events were better left officially unrecorded. But the satellite data told a different story. At precisely 11:47 a.m., an encrypted transmission had been sent from the vicinity of the range to a number that routed through servers in 12 different countries before reaching its final destination. The kind of communication pattern used by people whose conversations couldn't afford to be intercepted or decoded by hostile intelligence services. Hawkins had seen this pattern before, 3 times in the past 18 months, always associated with operations that were subsequently classified at levels above her clearance. Operations that involved a single individual whose identity was compartmented to the point where even acknowledging her existence required special authorization. She opened a new file, classified it at the highest level available to her security clearance, and began typing a report that would be read by exactly 3 people, none of whom would ever admit to having seen it. Subject: anomalous activity, Quantico Range Complex. Date: classified. Analyst: Dr. P. Hawkins, DSM'd. Satellite and Communications Intelligence indicates the presence of a classified asset at Quantico Advanced Marksmanship Range during standard qualification exercises. Asset demonstrated capabilities consistent with Tier 1 special operations training under adverse conditions. Exercise parameters exceeded normal qualification standards, suggesting evaluation rather than routine training. Assessment. Asset was conducting operational readiness verification prior to mission deployment. Recommend monitoring for related activities in next 72 to 96 hours. Recommendation. Maintain surveillance protocols but take no direct action. Asset appears to be operating under valid authorization at classification levels above this analyst's clearance. She saved the file, encrypted it, and forwarded it to recipients whose names she wasn't authorized to know. Then she deleted every trace of her analysis from her local system and returned to monitoring the dozens of other activities that cross her desk each day, most of which were exactly what they appear to be. But Dr. Hawkins had been analyzing intelligence data for long enough to recognize the difference between routine military activities and the careful orchestration of events that preceded operations in the shadow world that existed parallel to conventional military structure. And everything about the day's events at Quantico suggested that something significant was being set in motion, something that would unfold in locations and circumstances far removed from a Virginia training range. 72 hours later, Chen was 8,000 miles away, lying motionless in tall grass on a hillside that didn't appear on any tourist maps of Eastern Europe. The target was 1,847 meters away, partially concealed behind cover that had been specifically designed to defeat conventional sniper attacks. Wind conditions were variable and unpredictable, complicated by thermal currents rising from the valley below. The target wasn't a paper bullseye. It was a man whose activities had destabilized 3 governments and whose continued existence posed a threat to operations that kept the world stable in ways the public would never understand. He would be exposed for exactly 12 seconds as he moved between buildings. 12 seconds during which the future of several ongoing intelligence operations would be determined by Chen's ability to make a shot that was mathematically impossible under the current conditions. She'd been in position for 14 hours. Moving only when absolutely necessary, eating field rations that had no taste, and calculating wind patterns with the patience of someone who understood that rushing led to failure, and failure led to consequences that extended far beyond personal disappointment. Through her scope, she watched the building where her target was scheduled to appear. Intelligence reports indicated he would emerge at approximately 1,600 hours local time, cross the open courtyard, and enter the vehicle that would take him to a meeting where critical decisions would be made about operations she wasn't clear to know about. At 1,559 hours, her earpiece crackled with a voice that could have been coming from the next hillside or from a secure facility on another continent. "Ghost, this is Control. Target is moving to position. Confirm readiness." Chen's response was barely a whisper. "Ghost is ready. You have authorization to fire when target is acquired." At 1,600 hours and 37 seconds, a door opened in the building 1,847 meters away. Chen's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped to levels that medical professionals would have found alarming, and her entire focus narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope and the calculations that would determine whether the next 12 seconds changed the course of events in ways that historians would never be able to document. The shot, when it came, was as precise as the one she made 3 days earlier on a training range in Virginia. But this time, there were no observers to wonder how such accuracy was possible under impossible conditions. This time, there was only the whisper of wind through grass, the distant sound of an engine starting, and the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just completed another task that officially never happened. "Control, this is Ghost. Mission complete." "Confirm, Ghost. Exfiltration route Alpha is clear. Welcome home." Chen began the careful process of packing her equipment, erasing every trace of her presence on the hillside. In 6 hours, she would be on a military transport that didn't appear on any flight manifests, heading back to a country that would have no official record of her departure. And in a small town in Virginia, 2 military professionals would continue to wonder about the woman who had appeared on their range, made an impossible shot, and disappeared into a world that existed parallel to everything they thought they understood about military operations. But she never wondered about the people she left behind, the questions she created, or the implications of capabilities that most people weren't clear to know existed. She simply moved from one mission to the next, making shots that redefined impossible, protecting operations that kept the world stable, and leaving traces that would puzzle intelligence analysts for years to come. Because some legends aren't meant to be celebrated. Some heroes work best when the world never knows their names. And sometimes the most important victories are the ones that officially never happen at all. The story of the impossible shot at Quantico would never appear in military training manuals or marksmanship textbooks. But every few months, when conditions seemed too difficult and targets seemed too distant, instructors at ranges around the world would tell their student about a day when someone proved that impossible was just another word for what hadn't been accomplished yet. And somewhere in places that don't appear on maps, Chin continues to redefine what's possible, one impossible shot at a time. Chat Control Sonnet 4.